So we were looking at where are we on the spreadsheet?
Yeah, I'm looking at getting all the machinery up. Okay. Share screen. No, this one.
I think we have some difficult or contentious things coming up. Well, we'll see how it goes.
Speaking of difficult and contentious things too, I can bring up examples of differences in when definitions are debatable versus when they may be more prescribed. And it's interesting because I was looking at our COVID content, and SARS-CoV-2 is like a name actually designated by an entity. So while like whether SARS-CoV-2 is argued to really represent the thing that it is prescribed to represent, the term itself actually comes from an institution. So that's an interesting, like, who owns the term and who has the authority to give it meaning. Is the meaning that the term describes something that is debatable, and when? And like, how do you go about assigning definitions versus debating about them and resolving them, so that a definition can be prescribed once a debate is had, or not, depending on what you're crowdsourcing or curating.
Right. We sort of went over this on Friday, and I kind of want to avoid spending too much time on this subject, especially without Stephen. But for the bottom up, I kind of want to avoid it. But like, to kind of summarize what I think we had on Friday, there's a couple distinctions. One is that there's a difference between a debate about what should be the term or what should be the definition of a term, because that's a claim, right? Then and that's just handled as a claim, I think. There's another situation where you attach disambiguation, and disambiguation is meant to be invariant. It's like, it's an assumption. So it's not debatable, but it may be ambiguous. And so much in the way that like a non-disambiguated claim, it starts to show the problems when you get people creating arguments that have kind of there seems to be dispute about the relevance of those arguments, right? So some people may think it's relevant, some people may not. And that reasoning is because of their interpretation of the claim, right? Now, when you've disambiguated and yet you're still getting this, it could be that the disambiguation itself is ambiguous, right? And so you have essentially levels of disambiguation, and in that sense, disambiguation may never be a final goal, right? It may never be done. You may always see these things popping up. Then there's a third aspect of debating definitions, which is a totally separate process that we haven't gone into, and it's not going to fit into a bottom-up discussion today, but would be, how exactly do you create a disambiguation or a definition, and how do you improve it, and when is, so there's a totally separate process for creating disambiguations, which is probably a separate domain, as Stephen
which I probably want to get into some Friday. Yes,
I would love to. Yeah, I would love to do all. There's a lot of stuff I want to get into there. Yeah, but
yeah. It's a fascinating topic. I'm still a bit uncomfortable with the notion that we always use the relevance marker to distinguish meanings. It makes sense. I mean, it's not wrong, obviously. If the term is badly used, it's irrelevant. But for me, relevance was about logical soundness more than anything. And the idea is a term has multiple interpretations.
Soundness or validity? because I would say it's about validity.
Yeah, you could say that, but I'm trying to remember the distinction between.
Well, soundness is whether or not the underlying claim is true or not.
That's not the definition of soundness. I was
A sound argument is an argument in which
that's valid as an argument. For me, it's about the link, not about the premise.
Valid as an argument is about the link, which is what I call relevance, which means was, you know,
No,
was
for
this
me,
even an
okay, I
appropriate
use
argument
sound
to
in that same term, and I think that's the accepted logic usage.
Well, I had that totally switched around at one point, and I was corrected many times and switched it. So I could be double switching. I don't know. It's possible.
It's possible, and it's I should check. So I'll try to avoid that term for now until I check the definition. But anyway, the ambiguity of the term. Obviously, not obviously, but I think there's quite a few where indeed it's not appropriate as a link because it's not the right definition of the term. And in many cases, those were probably not, I know you don't care about that, but not intended by whoever made the point. And I'm saying this whole, it's unsound because I'm taking a totally different interpretation of the point, which maybe nobody did, versus, and again, combinatorial explosion, because we have to consider all the meanings, versus it's unsound because in any acceptation, it doesn't work, which is really the point of that I would like to measure with relevance. Now, maybe we have two relevance measures, but I'm trying to distinguish those two relevance measures.
And this from a bottom-up approach can be tackled, can be handled. You need to come up with an example, and I can already kind of imagine the beginning of an example, which would be something like, you know, the thing about I saw. You know, the hurricane one is, you know, I only counted 12 hurricanes as an argument. And then somebody counters, you know, your experience is only local and blah, blah, blah. And somehow there's another argument to counter that argument, which would be, no, you misunderstood the meaning of I, or something like that. Like I'm really stretching the example to try to get at a hint of what might be an example that we could try to tackle that separates the you know, teases out the different meanings of relevance in this case. But I would pose that as something to think about and bring to the discussion. Like, I don't know if you want to pause and come up with the example now.
Yeah, I have a concern which I admitted is purely a premature optimization concern, is having to assign relevance to all variations. And I think in some cases—
You don't have to assign relevance to all variations. Well, you assign relevance to any variation that somebody proposes, right?
Oh, are we taking care of who actually says what now? And that's a question. That's the whole question of auto-generated variants, right?
Yeah, if we're designing, we're considering the design for people, or we're not. I mean, if it's premature optimization, either you're considering people or not. If you're considering people, my answer is it matters when.
Yeah, there and that would be my approach.
If you're not considering people, then I wouldn't consider problems about combinatorics, because we're assuming in that case the infinite. A machine made all the variations, and a machine could have assigned all the relevance. So what's the problem, right? So I would say that it's a constraint that is undefined.
No, it's not because the machine can generate the variations that it knows how to assign relevance. That's non sequitur.
Well, sort of.
Oh, okay, correctly.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, don't worry about the combinatorics until we have constraints. I guess.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to be able to say this distinction doesn't matter in this case. It's like this statement, like this term, there's this distinction you could make, this distinction you could make, this distinction you could make. This one matters for this particular claim, this one doesn't. It's worth in both cases.
But
That's
you
what-
would do that through, you could do that through relevance arguments, right?
But what I'm saying is I want to not have to compute the relevance of both branches of a distinction if I say this distinction is not relevant. I want to be able to make the irrelevance at the distinction level, not at the branch level.
But
that's
you're
it.
talking about computing optimization, right?
Yes.
So if I responded by saying, I want to handle it by caching the results of the irrelevant branches so you don't have to recalculate until somebody makes another change, does that solve the problem? Because it's still a number that's hard coded. It's only going to change if somebody goes back and messes or adds an argument. So you solve the performance issue because you calculated it once and you're done.
No, but you've traded time for space.
Okay, I want to trade time for space. I mean, it's that's the problem with this discussion here is it's premature.
Yeah, well, it's
yeah.
No, I did say it was premature optimization. I do think it's a concern, but it's anyway. So let's go back to actual bottom up. What are we working on?
I guess we're at the phase where we need to choose the next one to discuss, and we haven't been. Every single, really the discussion of which one we want to discuss has been taking up the whole hour. And that's because we've needed to start fleshing out examples. And the examples are non-trivial. So,
that's true.
You know, that's been interesting. But so maybe we start by looking at the proposed ones and see if it triggers something we want to start looking at.
I was wondering too, by the way, why things take up the whole hour usually. And it's usually because we discuss about the whole concept instead of this specific use case. And when, for example, for the disambiguation, when I said, let's do disambiguation, and this is the example, like I want to interpret this sentence as different distinct claims, then this whole discussion about disambiguation and what it is came up. But we didn't talk about expressing this specific use case, which doesn't matter how we name it, right?
Right. Right. We're no longer trying to push off as much as possible for the future. We're kind of trying to consider it at the moment. But you know, the thing is with disambiguation, we are adding a new model element at this point. Right. And you need to understand what is the new model element you're adding. And I think that's why it's spun off.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe that's what we are going to look at again today. But
yeah. How about this one? A claim is proposed as a less ambiguous interpretation of another claim. I think it's a basic case. It's useful. It's part of what we're doing.
So it's possible to, the question is how these two claims are connected, right? Is that the question? Yeah.
Tim? I'm open to counter proposals, but that's my first proposal.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful feature.
it's a useful feature. The problem is with the minimal scope we have. We don't have users and we don't have use cases. We have just kind of, we're trying to model this structure. And you still have the, what is the purpose of this structure, so that you need to know what kind of relationship do we need between two things. Because on the surface, this is done. Okay, you just have two instances of claims, right? So what does it mean, a less ambiguous interpretation? And what do you want to do with the fact that it's less ambiguous?
Okay.
Is there something in the model that is indicating something is less ambiguous than another? Is there something in the model that needs to prove that it's less ambiguous than the other?
Okay, let me actually try to answer those questions since it's my use case. They're valid questions. Okay, basically we have a claim which is supposedly ambiguous, can have multiple interpretations. There's another claim which is, when we say it's less ambiguous, it has more restricted interpretations. So at least possibly, I'm not saying it in actuality, but potentially, it would be contrasted with a disjoint, distinct interpretation of the root claim. So I can say, and let me try to be more concrete. Greenhouse gases cause climate change. Let's go with our classic. And then somebody says, okay, well, specifically CO2 and methane are the main drivers of climate change. So that means you're not including some sulfur dioxide or some other gas. So that's so I'm saying it's less ambiguous because there's debate about which gases are included. So saying greenhouse gases is a bit of an umbrella term, it's a bit ambiguous. And here I'm saying, well, this one, but I'm not mentioning those ones. I'm saying those two are jointly driving, and maybe I shouldn't say main drivers because then it's not contradictory, but are the main, are the joint drivers of climate change. And then I can say, well, you could have also included this, and that would be a different interpretation. So I think whenever you have a less ambiguous, you have to say this is in contrast with a different interpretation, which is, clearly distinct. There's something in a symmetric difference, and but it's also a plausible interpretation of the original claim. Does that answer, or is that?
I don't think so. I don't think it answers like this scope.
Okay.
I think it's all in a different domain, essentially, is how you would say it.
Okay.
Which is hard because I want to get disambiguation into this domain.
Okay.
I think it's important. Go ahead, Jamie.
I know it's your example, Marc-Antoine, but I was going to say something earlier, but I unlocked the wrong microphone and I could hear myself and it made me stop. But so when I read this, it makes me wonder if there would be a case like there's an ambiguous claim like Paris is great, and then someone adds that less ambiguous claim, Paris the city is great. Like, is there a process where Paris the city is great somehow replaces the claim that is more ambiguous for the purpose of having like a more orderly structured argument? Or is it that Paris the city is great just becomes a claim that Paris is great is that interpretation? In which case, for argumentation to be relevant to further arguing that claim, it would have to fall under the disambiguating claim attached to the disambiguated claim, which seems a little messy. So it seems as though like maybe in the model there should be a process, which I guess is perhaps outside of the model, where these things are updated, which I don't know if it's already been included.
Let me answer that. There's two distinct aspects. One is I absolutely want to keep the two sentences because somebody else will come up at some point with Paris is great, and I want this to be in the system so I can say, by the way, this is an ambiguous sentence, and somebody identified that it could be disambiguated as Paris, the city in France, Paris, the city in Texas, Paris, the Greek hero. And so these are possible disambiguation with very distinct meaning, and we'd like to know which one you mean. But to be able to do that, we need to be able to keep the link between the original ambiguous sentence and the less ambiguous sentences. So keeping them around is absolutely a goal. Now, the second point is this link, is it itself a claim, or is it something else in the model? I would say it starts as a claim. Maybe it ends up at something else, and for me that's a distinct issue, but yeah, for me it starts as a claim. And then I expect somebody to tell me, but that's process. And again, whether it becomes something else, but it certainly I want a materialized link between the two sentences saying this is a less ambiguous version of that. And
so here's the non-meta version of that.
Yeah.
Which is the claim. It's the claim. The claim Paris is great. No, the claim Paris, the city, is great is a less ambiguous claim than the claim Paris is great.
Yeah,
That's a claim.
That's a
It's a
claim.
claim, and it's referring to two claims.
It's a less ambiguous interpretation. Yeah.
Do you want to type that in there, somebody?
Sure, I will.
I just wondered what it means less ambiguous, and I came to it's basically a subset of all the possible interpretations of another claim, right? If a claim
That sounds like a good first stab at that. Yes.
and then if we have some interpretation edges, then it's basically in the model because it's just a subset.
Would it be accurate to say that
so-
as a subset, it contains more information than the claim it's linked to? Like even just one word could just be additional information, like some sort of qualifier or adjective, like the city or the city in Texas. It seems as though that of the subsets, it implies that more information is present than the ambiguous claim it's linked to.
Yeah, it can
Yeah.
be, absolutely.
So
And what I said is like if we have two claims on one side and then three interpretations here, and the upper claim can be interpreted in 3 ways and the lower claim only in 2 ways, then the lower one is less ambiguous than the upper one, right? And they already related over or via the interpretations.
The interpretations I expect will form a feature matrix. Sorry, a feature lattice in the way that it's done in feature analysis, right? You have a term and you have a distinction, 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 and each distinction forms a node in the lattice. And the distinctions, the distinctions can combine. You know, it's intersection of this distinction and that distinction. And some of the intersections are empty, but that's not a concern. So, for example, in the case, yeah.
No, go ahead. Finish.
In some cases, the distinctions are subordinated, like Paris city is subdivided into Paris, France, and Paris, Texas, where but Paris city, Paris hero is kind of a superordinate distinction to the location distinction, right? In the case of actually, we probably have Paris city, Paris location, Paris person, and then person will have the Greek hero and maybe somebody else called Paris. And oh my God, yes. Then place, we have many Paris places, presumably cities. I don't know if something else can be called. Maybe there's a Paris river, but why not?
So aren't we basically saying the same, Marc-Antoine?
I think we are. I
Yeah.
think we are. But I wanted to introduce the concept of lattice as opposed to tree.
Yeah, okay.
I would rewrite the example here
Okay.
as because we break it up into the different claims, right? So you have a claim. Claim 1 is like Paris is great. Claim 2 is Paris, the city in France, is great. And claim 3 is that claim 2 is a less ambiguous interpretation of claim 1. I don't know if it's interpretation of claim 1. That's an interesting way to write it. And so I kind of want to know.
Okay, let me
are
define my
intending with
terms
it.
a bit. interpretation, meaning it's one could hear claim 2 and understand claim 1. That's what I mean by interpretation. And less ambiguous, meaning there's another claim, at least one other claim that is substantially distinct and could also be understood from hearing claim 2. So let me write that down.
Yeah, okay. I would say less ambiguous version of claim 2, because the interpretation, well, you've been proposing interpretation as something in the model, and I haven't understood that yet, because it's, to me, the person does it in their head as opposed to putting it into the system.
Yeah, what does it mean in the model? Right now, I'm trying to be at the phenomenological level, but how do we model it is the next question, really. Yes. And maybe we should go there. And there, I'm not sure, but are we okay with those definitions?
I'm okay for now.
Maybe we'll have to define this.
I get what you mean, at least.
Yeah, seems good.
Yeah. So yeah, but I have problems with fitting this into the model, because
go ahead.
But part of the reason is that I'm seeing way ahead of what we really want, of many other things we're going to want, and the other part is, even without that, it implies a need for claim structure, or a relationship between the claim structure and the sentence somehow.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, we're both seeing ahead here, and we're both, I don't know if we're seeing the same thing, but that's another story.
Probably not.
Probably not. But yeah. let's say that there's a version of this. Okay, when I said interpretation in my model, I was very much doing a kind of sentence versus meaning here. Which I don't think you're doing, but at the sentence level, or at your definition of claim level, I think if we have the notion of inclusion, I've been pushing very hard for the notion of inclusion, like saying this claim is a subset, a strict subset of this other claim, right?
No, we haven't really gone over that.
Yeah. What I would say,
we've gone over sets and other. I mean, we have gone over it in the sense of greater than, less than, greater than or equal, or that sort of ranges.
Yep. Right? Numeric predicates. Yes.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking is it's important to first have the notion of subclaim. That is, when this claim is true, the other claim is true, because it's a subset, and then we can get into strict subset. There's other truth conditions, yada yada yada, non-empty difference, and now interpretation is a special case of subsetting, because not all subsets are interpretations, in the sense that it may or may not be natural to understand the subclaim Paris, France from Paris is great. I think in this case it's natural. It can be argued, and that's a very subjective thing. But can somebody understand that from? Versus if I say Paris is great, and my understanding is le premier arrondissement is great, you'll be like, why this narrow interpretation? Why only premier arrondissement? Right? Why not the whole city? It's a subset. It's a proper subset, but it's not a natural proper subset. you don't expect anybody to come up with that. I don't know if I have a modeling interpretation of that, but for what it's worth.
Well, I do. I mean, it all fits into disambiguation in general to specific for me. But
okay, how do you distinguish disambiguation? Well, yeah, I think I do too. The question is could Paris be used as a name to refer to the subset? Like if you have a lattice of meanings and the sentence can be attached to any point on the lattice. And there's a point when you go too far down on the lattice, nobody will use that name anymore. Nobody will say Paris when they mean first arrondissement. So you've broken the association of the name with the meaning by going too far down the
yeah, to me, that's another thing we haven't talked about yet, which is largely process, but probably gets reflected in the model, and I'm not sure how. No, which is, okay, we have in our model already a claim has multiple sentences.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't have in our model anything about are those sentences actually appropriate? And that's essentially what you're saying is Paris is great, valid sentence or version of the is great. Example you gave.
Sorry.
Champs-Élysées is great.
Champs-Élysées,
right?
Let's use Champs-Élysées.
Champs-Élysées.
It's fine.
The Eiffel Tower is great. I don't know, whatever.
It's the first administrative division. Sorry, it's.
I don't know.
It's how they named the neighborhood.
Yeah. But yeah, that's to me what you're getting at is the sentence appropriate for the claim, which is a more specific claim, and this is this gets into the much larger question of what is a claim again, right?
Yeah.
But maybe we're again getting a little too far ahead of ourselves. This is yet another like single example that's going to take an hour and we won't finish it. But
at some point we have to go through these, huh?
We have to go through all this,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's interesting questions. I wouldn't say this is the first time we've talked about this either.
No, but
Let's time box this another 5 minutes of the way you were going, and then I want to back up because there's a much more direct approach to this claim, this example that I want to take. So let's keep going the way we're going. Where the last thing I said was that there's a relationship between sentences and claims that we haven't discussed whether or not a sentence is appropriate for the claim. And the other thing is, what exactly is a claim? What is the essence of the claim if it's not the sentence? In Stephen's view, for now at least, I think sentences were, well, at least at some point sentences were, yeah.
Where is the one where we had, sorry, I'm kind of, that's Stevens, positive sentence, negative sentence. That's the one where you, that's the one I think we had done last. Yes.
Yeah.
Where you had the claim has a bunch of sentence and it has one negation.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you have multiple sentences, you can't say that the claim is the sentence. The claim has multiple sentences. What we haven't talked about is whether or not the sentences are by definition always appropriate, or if that's debatable. I think we can all agree it's debatable. In the end, in practice, it'll have to be debatable.
And we may want to have a plausibility indicator saying how often is that sentence used to mean that thing, or how likely is it, or how.
Yeah, and then we get into that thing, right? What is the definition of that thing? And I have a definition in my head.
So do I.
But I don't have a full design of that, and that gets into the claim structure that might include theme and ream or something. My initial vision of it was somehow a collection of disambiguations.
And this is why I got into the disambiguation lattice. I called it a distinguo at some point, like when you have two conflicting definitions. I'm saying here's a distinction, which is a node in the lattice, and there's I'm saying these are disjoint sub meanings for this given meaning, thought proxy in this diagram, whether it's a claim or an entity or doesn't matter, right? But there's this a distinction is saying here are distinct sub meanings of this meaning and non-overlapping subsets, blah, blah, blah. And each of them, because they have multiple sentences, one of them will be kind of a more canonical sentence, or at least they will be distinguishing. But
let me put it a different way. Imagine you do have it fully disambiguated or distinguoed or whatever.
Yeah. Which
is there a no? I would imagine there is one claim there that is fully disambiguated. Can you construct the canonical sentence from the disambiguations?
I would say yes, but I'm just a bit. This is why it's the fully that bothers me. It's always
well, but understanding that
one second. This is important. It's disambiguated for a given need. For me, maybe there's infinitely many disambiguation, of which only some are relevant in a given context. So that means I should be able, yes, to generate a sentence of the relevant distinctions for a given context.
Well, I mean, we've talked about how disambiguations are also ambiguous, but let's say that, the claim, this is my car, right? Full disambiguation will be, you have a definition of this, right? Which could be an entity. You have some entity. It could be the car registration or something. You have some entity. We've already talked about is, my, meaning ownership, and me is implied, right? So you'd have to have a disambiguation for who is me, and car, which is easy to disambiguate, right? Now, if you have these disambiguations, you have this car registration, you have this who I am, you're talking about possession and the vehicle type car,
whatever.
Yeah, this is my car. I mean, probably the canonical sentence would be something like, car with registration, blah, 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 belongs to Timothy Ryan High, something like that. Is that the canonical sentence?
Social insurance number, blah, 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 or
yeah. Right, yeah.
Citizenship, date of birth, whatever.
So there are a lot of ways to say that sentence, right?
Yeah.
And contextually, you might choose one over the other, but there might,
No, that's well and good. And I think, like, in any context where this sentence is uttered, you would want enough context to disambiguate who's me, which car is it, blah, 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 right? And it makes no sense to utter that sentence and consider it in a context where you don't have, well, maybe as we're doing now abstractly as a linguistic object, but in most contexts, you would want to know which car, whose person, blah, blah, and all those disambiguation. But let me actually make a counterexample to that claim.
Okay, we're far past the 5-minute time boxing I gave. I'll let you give your example, and then I want to try to attack it from a different angle.
In general, as you said, we would say ownership is some kind of legal ownership, yada, yada, yada. And we can totally imagine a context where this is defeasible, right? This is about car thieves speaking to a reseller. This is the one I stole, right? This is my car. And then it's a different notion of ownership. So we have a default notion of ownership, which could be left vague so that it applies to many contexts, because really in most cases,
Sure.
we don't care.
Sure.
And in some cases, we'll want to distinguish, is it real ownership or thieving, or does it, do we include or exclude thieving ownership, right? But in most cases, it doesn't matter. And this is what I mean by, do we fully disambiguate? In many contexts, it shouldn't matter. And we can disambiguate, but we shouldn't have to.
Right, but so let's say you're doing this in a court case to decide, you know, who keeps car.
And this is a context where we have to.
Right, right. There's a context where we have to, and you're going to come up with different arguments for "this is my car," right? That are interpreting, you know, belongs to, for example, and each one can be used. The same sentence can be used as argument supporting and trying to defeat, but it's really trying to support or defeat, not "this is my car," but the car should be officially handed over to this person once this case is over, or something, which wasn't the original claim. But
let's imagine the court case. It's a fascinating context where you have the owner saying "this is my car" and the thief saying this, having said "this is my car" and this is on record. Which disambiguated meaning applies at any given point, given that both are relevant to the context, and they could be distinct. That's a totally realistic. But in another context, it doesn't matter. So what I'm saying is, which disambiguations matter is context dependent. Yeah,
but the context can be a claim you're trying to resolve, or should be, will be in the argumentation, a claim you're trying to resolve. You know, who do we decide to give the ownership of the car to, right?
But what I'm saying is, which disambiguations have to be resolved depends on the claim.
I agree with that.
Yeah, okay.
I totally agree with that. Okay, so I'm actually excited now by this example, because I think it can help us start peeling apart the complexities of disambiguation and the claim structure, which is a good way to go. And I wasn't sure how to go that way. But so let's go back to our example. It's essentially claim one is a less ambiguous version or interpretation of claim two, right? That's our thing. So how do we model that? Right.
Right.
And
what
if we go back and look at the look at our model here. Now what you'll see is, in either version, you can if you just consider the sentences, you're done. It fits into here, but that's not very useful. What you want to do is somehow the fact that this claim is referring to other claims is important.
Yes.
Right. And so we want to model the fact that it's referring to the other claims. And what happens here is it's essentially the claim. It's referring to other claims, and looking further ahead, it's referring to entities. So it doesn't have to be a claim it's referring to. The fact that if one claim is true and the other claim is not true, or either, doesn't affect the structure of this claim. In fact, this is a claim that's referring to claims, but it depends upon or implies nothing about the truth or falseness of either claim. It's just referring to that.
Right.
So it's the same thing as saying, my dog is prettier than your dog, right? It's a claim referring to two different things and making a relationship, right? And yet we know we want to be referring to something now.
It does say something about the truth, in the sense that if the more precise claim is true, then the more vague claim can be said to be true as well, but marginally.
Except that we haven't, that gets into what I would call scoring.
Possibly. I agree that's not relevant
Yeah.
now. Let's. I wanted
Yeah,
to bring
there's
in-
no way to tease it out from the sentences, right? I think is the problem.
The reality is, in many cases, people will either when you say, "Oh, this interpretation is true, so the claim is true," it's like, no, it means that this interpretation is true, but that doesn't mean that this other interpretation is true, which is absolutely
Right.
true. So it doesn't mean that we agree on the truth value of the
The
claim.
relationship between, yeah.
Oh, we agree. We can agree on the relationship, but that doesn't
I
mean
mean,
that
the relationship, the inference that you can make.
the ambiguous claim, on the truth value of the ambiguous claim, because we might differ on interpretation.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah.
So to some degree, we're cheating here, but I would like to start talking about how could we model the fact that this one claim is referring to two other claims.
Yeah.
How that gets structured.
What I did, I had the distinction here, right? Which was a relation between two topics for me, or two entities, because for me, claims are a special case of entities. So I can do it at the claim level or at the entity level. And I just had the distinction, which means the relation between the two distinct sub-interpretations, but that's not a good way to do it. I'm not happy with that now. What I would want is to say, I'd actually have not the triad, but the n-ad, meaning here's the ambiguous statement, and here are at least two distinct interpretations, possibly another binary. Like city location is, but location, then there could be an area, right? There's many cities called Paris, and many persons called Paris as well. Paris Hilton, Paris, Texas. There, I'm sure. Paris.
I don't want to model this world anymore.
Is it?
No, I don't believe so. I think that is her.
On Friday, we had a very difficult.
And I think fruitful discussion about
exercise.
Satoshi.
No, exactly. No, very fruitful one.
Fruitful about what?
About disambiguation of Satoshi Ito,
Nakamoto.
Nakamoto.
Satoshi Nakamoto. Because you could say Satoshi Nakamoto did something, right? And then depending on what that Satoshi Nakamoto did, could be affected by you're referring to an entity which is Satoshi,
which is unknown.
But
we don't.
Yeah, which is unknown. And if it's if they wrote the white paper, that's one thing. And then when you figure out later on who Satoshi is, that sentence could still be relevant or correct or whatever. But if it's Satoshi ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on October 13th, well, immediately if Satoshi is actually a collective, maybe that's not true, or maybe that's true.
Yeah,
anyway,
if there's collective authorship, then the question of there's necessarily a unique publisher and probably the same as a unique account holder, but is that the same as Satoshi the author, which may not be a single person? So that.
Yeah,
that was
well,
fun.
we'll yeah. watch the video from Friday, I guess, for more background.
Yeah, but let's go back to the relation distinction. There's a distinction between an ambiguous claim and a less ambiguous claim. I don't think there's such a thing as a non-ambiguous claim, but a less ambiguous claim. And I think it's usually important to have at least two distinct ones, because otherwise I'm not, there's a real disambiguation happening.
Say that again, the last sentence.
I think there need to be at least two distinct, less ambiguous versions. I don't think we're speaking about disambiguation unless we have the ambiguous one. And
I don't. Well, I know. I disagree.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Let's go into
our example here. You have Paris is great, and Paris, the city in France. I mean, you could even leave it more ambiguous. Paris, the city, is great.
What I'm saying is, it's
but still ambiguous version of Paris is great, right?
What I'm saying is, it's only less ambiguous because implicitly we have at least, well, we know it could be Paris, Texas. We know it could be Paris, the hero. We know blah, blah, blah.
It's implicit, but it doesn't have to be
well,
reified in the
okay. That is a valid question. Do we need the third one to make the point that we're disambiguating? I'm tempted to say yes, because otherwise you might be, it's easier to make a mistake and make a vacuous claim of disambiguation. Like if I say this is a more precise version of that, I'm implying something is missing. And if there's something that's missing does not exist, I may be making a vacuous claim. Now it's possible, I'm perfectly happy to say, we're allowed to include hypotheticals.
What you're actually saying here is that without a counter example, the risk is that the two are still identically the same claim.
Yeah. I'm not wedded to that, but I'm pushing it as
this gets a bit into process again, which is, I have a disagreement with Stephen that is waiting for us to get to process, which is when you have when you have an ambiguous claim and you disambiguate it in place and just make a copy, or do you essentially change the ambiguous version to make it less ambiguous?
Yeah,
right?
Jamie asked that question and I said, let's keep it because it's so useful when somebody else comes up with the original ambiguous statement to be able to say, by the way, this needs to be ambiguated. What maybe
except that the statement is, it could just be folded into the sentences, and so you find it by looking at the sentences.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. But we're keeping it.
Well, I disagree with keeping it, but yeah, that's a process discussion, I think.
Well, I'm saying I have a use case for keeping it.
I have also, we should disambiguate the meaning of keep, right? Which is really where the problem is differing interpretations of the word keep.
Yeah. And when you said it's still in the sentences, I said, yeah, that's a way of keeping it. And I'm happy with that. Whether it exists as a meaning object, I'm not sure. I would tend to, but that I'm more supple. But we're keeping the sentence because the use case of knowing in which cases it's like if sentences are attached to meaning objects, and meaning objects are only defined by the underlying distinctions, which is where I'm going now. I'm saying they're only points in the lattice of distinctions. So in a way, the multiple meanings are the meat, the lattice meat of all the meanings bearing that sentence. And the meat may itself bear that sentence or not, right? In which case there's a really damning ambiguity, but if the meat bears that sentence, it's probably a more benign ambiguity.
Something to just bring up quickly before I leave is as you're designing this, especially form, I know this is thinking ahead of just modeling all of this, but making sure prohibitively complex and overwhelming for new users.
Right.
It's a problem that Wikipedia has, is onboarding new users. They don't really have a formal onboarding process, and you kind of already have to be.
Well, when you say
familiar with
users, you're talking about moderators in that case.
moderators. That's it. Yeah. So crowdsourced editors, moderators. They don't really have a formal onboarding process, and you have to already be familiar with how Wikipedia works in order to work your way through the new onboarding process. I think they're now working on that, like creating an onboarding process. They're piloting that. So just keep that in mind, is that as things get more complex with like lattices, with all the disambiguation possibilities, how complex that could get for new people who you might have to rely on, their energy and attention to continue to work.
I don't expect a lot of people to get to understand the notion of lattice. This is a developer speak, but I do expect people to understand the notion of distinction.
Right.
All right. Well, I gotta go, guys.
But bye. Enjoy
Bye.
Mexico.
Have fun.
Thanks.
Cabo.
Thank you. I'll see you guys next time.
See ya.
See you.
Yeah, so we're at the time limit. We didn't even scratch the surface of where I'd like to go. I don't know if you want to spend another 15 minutes or if you want to.
I can. I don't know about you. I don't have a hard stop now.
I also don't have a hard stop, but yeah, I don't have much to contribute to this discussion.
I'm informally proposing a model. I should make it formal. And you say you're speaking of where you want to go. So maybe you have a model in mind that you want to propose as well, even if it's not formal yet.
Yeah, the way I wanted to go was more in just refocusing what we're modeling here, or how to approach it. Because I want to focus on the structure, right? And I think, yeah, it's hard to couch these in specific examples, but maybe we just need to take a bigger leap at this point. That claims need to, we need to get into what is the structure of a claim, basically.
We may do it. We may dig into entities at this point, or we may.
That's kind of where I'm looking at.
Yeah. That's a question. Or we may punt it, frankly, because I think, and that's a claim, that the disambiguation logic will be exactly the same for entities and claims. Claims are entities, and the disambiguation logic, it's just that in some cases you can deduce the claim disambiguation lattice from their entity disambiguation lattice. And that's a separate problem and an interesting one. And okay, that way it's different. But what I'm saying is we can think of disambiguation in the abstract, whether for entities and claims, and then we can see how entity disambiguation propagates to claim disambiguation. But I think that can come later. And I don't think that decomposing claims into entities is necessary to think about disambiguation. I'm not saying we mustn't do it, we could, but I'm saying I don't think it's necessary.
Let's start with our simple example, which is how do we model claim one is less ambiguous than B, right? Claim one is less ambiguous than claim B, okay.
What I'm proposing is an explicit distinction relation with three terms, or with two at least. I would say at least three terms, but we could start with two and leave one undefined, saying here's a claim, here's another claim, this one is ambiguous and this one is more precise. And that means, for one, that it's a plausible interpretation. Somebody could understand that from the other. And that's a human statement, human level statement. And it's a strict set. That is, it's a kind of fully contained in. And for me, it does
explain how you would instantiate the claim that we have here.
Okay, let me, can I do it on this? Let me, because I think it's perfectly appropriate to do it on this. So this is on TIM2. Yeah, TIM2. TIM2 PUML. Yeah. Here, I would have class distinction claim ambiguous claim claim precise. And so distinction is itself a claim. And I would be tempted to put 2*, but this is what we're arguing about. And obviously my plant UML is not running, damn it. What's wrong? Pending, okay. Yes, yes, you can. Okay, and now it's illegible, but sorry, I have Mac has become really anal about permissions. I have to tell, yes, I'm giving you permissions to access that directory every time. So that's illegible, which is annoying.
So what you're doing is you're creating a whole new kind of claim, which is a claim about two claims.
Yes.
Is that too specific? Because like the next example I'll throw out is spotted dogs are prettier than brown dogs.
Yeah.
Or my dog is prettier than your dog, right?
And that's a restriction.
Well,
which is different. I would have a separate restrictions.
Which means that you want to represent in the model every possible type of claim, which means every
oh Lord, the PUML is absolutely horrid. I don't know why.
But like because what you're doing with this model is essentially every single claim needs to have a type. It needs to be a claim type with its own mode of truth.
Yes.
And the question is, do we need this level of formality or this intense of a structure? And can we capture every single possible type of truth or claim statement?
It's a valid question. But those, for me, those are fundamental enough that I would have them.
I mean, and then what happens to your model when you're, and the claim is these claims are more specific than those claims?
Well, you'll have many restrictions.
You'll have many restrictions.
Yeah.
And then
Now-
you'll have
now
a
if it's-
claim that
now if
joins the,
If specific, then a combination of claims, that's interesting because we don't have claim combination in this model yet.
well, that's what I'm asking. That's what I'm saying is, what do you do about?
Yeah,
So
when you
where
say-
I'm going with this is I'm looking at more claim as entity and how to model that into a claim, as opposed to how to model the truth structure of the claim.
Yeah. And this is where we get into this, right? A claim is made of entities, and yeah, maybe not that version, but oh. God, it's being, sorry. Claim is made of entities, and all the distinction and specialization are at the are cases of topic relations, which happen at the entity level, and they only apply to claims because claims is a kind of entity. That's what I had.
Well, how do you, yeah, I mean, how do you structure this? Because what are the entities for your dog is prettier than my dog, as opposed to my dog is prettier than your dog?
Well, you'd have the, okay, so the dog ownership is, the dog is an entity, the dog owner is an entity. The ownership is a predicate, and I don't have predicates here, and that's I totally, well, I have it, but it's work in progress at this point, entity variable arguments. But where I'm totally going is having predicate as first class objects, variable unification, the works. And so I would do variable unification. And so there's a predicate about that unifies my dog and me. There's a predicate that unifies your dog and you. And there's a predicate about prettier, or maybe I could distinguish it into prettiness evaluation and have a comparison predicate, but that's has its own issues. But let's say I have a prettier predicate unifying the two dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the formal, the ultra formal version of the statement. If I need to go there, don't forget formalization. Or I could just have,
Right.
Identify the dogs without worrying too much about the predicates. That's identifying the predicates should be optional, but it should be possible to identify entities without identifying the whole sentence. But identifying the whole sentence, I think, should be possible. And variable unification or distinction probably needs to be important. Like knowing that we're speaking about two distinct dogs is probably important, so that it's when it's my spotted dog as opposed to your non-spotted dog. We both have a spotted dog, but in this case, we want to apply the spotted predicate to my dog, but not to one of my dogs versus one of your dogs. So that means we need to know those variables are distinct. So yeah, I was going to go there. I don't know if that is where you wanted to go. Question.
I think it's my fundamental belief that it's where we have to go and where I don't want to go, because I think it gets to the complexities that nobody wants to deal with in a system and that we like to, hide from people. But
I've been hovering on that same position as well.
Yeah.
I have sympathy. It's like, do I want to get into higher order logic and higher order predicate calculus? On the one hand, no, because bloody, in French we say panier de crabe, kettle of, it's a kettle of crabs and onto one another, and it's
I see. Yeah.
impossible to tease apart. I don't think it's
See.
that. On the other hand, that technology has progressed, like higher order logic libraries are getting available. Do I want to do a solver? No. I mean, that's the recent conversation with Stephen, right? I don't want to do a solver. That's out of my space.
Right.
Being able to model that.
The problem with me is that like it's necessary to achieve canonicality.
Absolutely correct.
And that's why.
And it's been done. I mean, I'm beginning to talk with some people who have called a signature, and that means that they went all the way to predicate and having a kind of hash of the predicate formula.
Mm-hmm.
It exists. Now, of course, it's proprietary, so we have to redevelop it, but it's been done. I don't think it's avoidable.
I mean, it's the sort of thing that we could also model progressively as we learn more, because it's the 80-20 thing. I think if we just do a very simple version, we'll already knock out most of the cases we care about, and then as we hit edge cases, we have to.
And this is where I'm happy to say, predicates are optional, and I'm okay with that. The optional, not in, I mean, in any one sentence's formalization. I think we have to get into that level of modeling so that we can model it if and when we want to. Not optional, optional in any one instance in the model. We may or may not want to push the analysis that far in any one case. And that means there will be another relationship, which will be one of the few replacements, is this sentence was formalized up to that point, and now we're formalizing it up to that point, which means the signature is changing because we have a more detailed formalization than we used to. That's gonna be fun. Not.
I don't know if we need to do that.
I think we do.
I don't know if we need to do that. Well,
okay.
Maybe.
The question Jamie was asking about replacement, I said we want to keep the old sentence, but where I agree with her that there's replacement happening is that if we had involved the imprecise claim, ambiguous claim somewhere in an argument, we may want to revisit those arguments and replace the imprecise one with a precise one, right?
Right.
And this is where the replacement will probably happen. And it's the same with if we've used improperly incompletely formalized.
Well, okay,
statement.
but is your understanding of the more ambiguous claim that it's specific meaning, but they didn't put it in, or is your understanding that it represents all possible interpretations?
Both. Both.
Yeah, my understanding is it represents all possible interpretations.
Okay. How are those two meanings different? Sorry.
Because you're talking about replacing an argument that is more ambiguous with one that is less ambiguous.
Necessary, of course.
Yeah, that makes sense when the conclusion is less ambiguous.
Would be affected. And that's why I'm saying it's a lattice, and I want to be able to allow, like, not do the combinatorics of saying, all the precise one versus leading to all the precise ones. I want to be able to say, no, this distinction doesn't matter in this argument. I want to be able to point to an englobing meaning high in the lattice, because that is what I'm using in this argument, in this context.
Right.
But it's also true that the as a matter of and yes process, because we're never in the final state. When we first introduce it, we're not aware of a specific ambiguity. So the both and lack of information are equivalent. And then the information comes and we have to revisit, is this a distinction that doesn't matter in this case, or is it one that matters and I want to do the replacement? Where it's used, in the context where it's used.
I think we may be at an inflection point with this process. We may or we may not be. And this is the thing, is where we're like done with the most core, the most basic model, and we're actually going into a different domain, because exactly, if we're modeling entities and disambiguations, it's bringing Stephen a separate domain, and it changes our focus. And maybe we start going down that route. The question is, are we done, or is there more to explore before we start hitting on all the rest? I mean, the one thing I would say in a hand wavy sort of way is that it looks like what claim really needs is some sort of internal structure that is it's unique. What is the primary key or structure of a claim? And we know it involves entities, and we know or think it involves predicates and composite predicates and so forth. So can we put some sort of generic name on claim structure? Say a claim has a claim structure, makes it unique, and it's the claim structure that refers to the other claims, or which, and then we move on to.
I just want to say one thing before we, to answer your first question with the basic domain without ambiguity. No, we're not, because we don't have composite claims. And I think and multi-premise arguments.
Okay, yeah. So maybe we want, now that we've kind of gone down this route, we need to back up and just focus on the things. But like
on the other hand, if it were my choice, and it's what I'll do Friday, because it will be my choice, I think it's important to first speak about, for example, predicates, because how we do predicates and variable unification will have impact on how we do multi-premise arguments. So for me, it's more core than multi-premise arguments, because variable unification, how does it propagate to multi-premise argument, is an interesting question. So in terms of domain ordering, I think predicates are more.
Yeah, I think, but maybe we should, for my next week, focus on multi-premise arguments in their simplest form without worrying about this back propagation sort of thing. So we get that basic structure, because I feel like we've gone way far afield, and there are certain basic things that we should bake in first.
I just make a plea. I don't think this is a different domain should be an excuse to postpone, and we'll have to get to the disambiguation domain.
Well, but I do think that
and as
finishing
I said,
all the simple
anyway.
cases, finishing all the simple cases is something that I feel like we should do first.
Okay.
Yeah.
End of the day, I think.
Yeah, and I got a lot of stuff to do, but I would love to go a lot more into what would be the structure for entity, predicate, composite predicate, and define the unique structure of each claim, because that to me is
I am working on that very much.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, folks.
All right, guys.
Ciao, ciao.
Have a good rest of your day.
Just one last thing. Do read the SOA thing I put the last Monday, I think, if we're going to discuss that.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Ciao.
Yep. Bye.